Valak had never met an enemy like the humans. He had fought countless battles, crushed civilizations, and witnessed the terror that the Council's forces instilled across the galaxy. But there was something about humanity that unsettled him. It wasn't their technology, nor their fleet size. It was their sheer unpredictability. And nowhere was this more evident than in the human warrior known as Alex Kane. When the Council first encountered the humans, they had dismissed them as primitive, no real threat to the vast power of the Galactic Council. Their ships were weak, their weapons inefficient, and their strategies were chaotic at best. But Valak quickly realized how wrong they were. Alex Kane had led a small group of human rebels to disrupt a key supply line on the outskirts of Council territory. Valak thought it would be easy. His fleet outnumbered the humans, and their tactics had been well studied over centuries. But what Valak didn't anticipate was the fierce determination and cunning that came with every human move. They fought not with the precision of a well-trained army, but with the wild unpredictability of a species determined to survive at all costs. It was during this first battle that Alex Kane's name became known to the Council. Valak had expected an easy victory, but the humans fought like cornered animals, using the terrain, creating distractions, and exploiting every weakness in his forces. It was a chaos that Valak couldn't control. Human fighters would strike unexpectedly, disappear into the shadows, and then reappear where they were least expected. Their ships, though outclassed, darted in and out of the fight with a speed and agility that made it nearly impossible for the Council forces to pin them down. Valak was growing frustrated. This was supposed to be a quick mission, but it was turning into a prolonged nightmare. For every ship he lost, 2 more humans appeared to take its place. And then there was Kane. Valak couldn't shake the image of the human commander. Kane had single-handedly destroyed one of the Council's supply ships in a daring raid. He had walked away from the battle without a scratch, leaving Valak seething with frustration. How could one man cause so much trouble? Despite the chaos, Valak had finally cornered the human leader. A bounty had been placed on Kane's head, and after several weeks of hunting, the Council had tracked him down to a remote human colony. Valak ordered the capture of Alex Kane alive. He wanted to make an example of him, show the galaxy that humanity's resistance would be crushed, and that no one could stand against the might of the Galactic Council. When they finally captured Kane, he was shackled and brought before Valak. The human was covered in dirt and blood, yet his eyes burned with defiance. Valak was expecting the usual begging, pleading for mercy. It was a common reaction from those who had been caught by the Council. But Kane didn't beg. Instead, he stood tall, his eyes never leaving Valak's. "You think you've won." Kane spat, his voice steady and unwavering. "You think you can stop us with your fleets, your power? You're wrong. We'll never stop fighting. You've only made us stronger." Valak had been caught off guard. This human, this Alex Kane, wasn't afraid. In fact, it was as though he welcomed the challenge. Valak had faced countless enemies in his career, but none of them had looked at him the way Kane did. There was no fear in his gaze, only a burning desire for revenge, a thirst for freedom that Valak couldn't comprehend. "Foolish human," Valak growled, his grip tightening on his weapon. "You don't know what you're up against." Kane's lips curled into a smile. "Oh, I know. But I also know that you can't stop us. You can kill me, but there are 1,000 more like me waiting for their chance to strike. And when that happens, your precious council will fall." Valak had never heard such defiance. It unnerved him. It should have been a simple task to crush this human leader, but instead, Kane had turned the tables. His confidence, his courage, had shaken Valak in a way that no enemy had ever done before. The human's words were not just empty threats. They were a statement of truth, a challenge that the council could no longer ignore. In the days that followed, Valak found himself haunted by the encounter. He would lie awake in his quarters, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over again. How had a single human managed to make him feel so uncertain? He had faced entire civilizations, wiped out entire species, but Kane's words kept echoing in his mind. Valak's obsession with Kane grew. He began to study the humans' tactics, analyzing every battle, every skirmish. It was clear that Kane wasn't just a leader. He was a symbol of defiance, of everything the Council feared. The more Valak thought about it, the more he realized that humanity wasn't fighting just for survival. They were fighting for something much larger. They were fighting for freedom, for the right to choose their own destiny. And that was something the Council couldn't tolerate. But Valak couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about Kane. It was about every human who had fought alongside him. This was no longer just a rebellion. It was a movement that could very well be the end of the Council's reign. Months later, Valak received news of a new attack. A human-led fleet had struck at one of the most fortified Council bases on the far side of the galaxy. It wasn't just a raid. It was a full-scale assault. And once again, Alex Kane was at the heart of it. The human commander had proven to be more than just a nuisance. He was becoming a nightmare. Valak knew that humanity had to be stopped. The Council's power was built on control, on crushing those who dared to oppose them. But humans, led by figures like Alex Kane, had no intention of bending. They would rather die fighting than submit. Valak had to admit that he was starting to see humanity in a different light, not as a mere enemy, but as a force to be reckoned with. As the war raged on, Valak found himself wondering if the Council could truly defeat the humans. Every time they thought they had won, humanity would rise again, bolder, stronger, more determined. And Alex Kane, with his unyielding spirit, was always at the forefront of that fight. Valak had faced many battles in his career, but none had challenged him the way this war with humanity had. He had underestimated them before, but now he knew better. The humans were more than just a nuisance. They were the beginning of the end for the Council. In the end, Valak's mind was consumed with one question. How had this small, seemingly insignificant species managed to challenge the most powerful empire the galaxy had ever known? And more importantly, how could he stop them? The stories of Alex Kane's courage, his defiance, his challenge to the mighty Council haunted Valak every night. The war was far from over, and Valak knew that as long as humanity had warriors like Alex Kane, the Council would never be safe. No matter how many battles they won, the scars of the humans' rage would always remain. Valak stood on the bridge of his flagship, his sharp eyes scanning the data screens in front of him. The reports came in steadily. Human fleets were moving, making raids against Council strongholds in the Outer Rim. At first, he dismissed it as a nuisance, something easily dealt with. But the more he studied the patterns of the human attacks, the more he realized that these weren't just random strikes. There was purpose behind them, intelligence, and most importantly, there was a leader. A name that echoed through the corridors of the Council: Alex Kane. The human leader had become a symbol, a beacon of defiance, and Valak's obsession. This was no longer just about dealing with a small rebellion. This was a war for the survival of the Council's dominance. Kane wasn't like the others. He was different. His tactics were unconventional, unpredictable, and worst of all, effective. Valak, a seasoned commander who had crushed countless enemies, had never encountered anything quite like this. It wasn't just that the humans fought with an intensity that bordered on madness. It was that they fought with heart, with an unpredictable wildness that threw off the Council's best-laid plans. When Alex Kane led his forces, it was as if they were everywhere at once, attacking from angles the Council never anticipated, causing chaos, and then disappearing before the enemy could respond. It was the kind of warfare Valak had never seen before, and he hated it. Valak's mind kept returning to a particular incident, one that had shaken him to his core. It had happened on a distant planet called Ashera, a strategic location that the Council had taken great care to fortify. They had stationed a significant fleet there, and the human resistance was a mere shadow. A few skirmishes here and there, nothing that warranted a full mobilization. Or so they thought. Alex Kane, with a small fleet of barely 30 ships, launched an attack on Ashera's spaceport. It was a well-guarded facility, heavily protected by defense grids and automated weapons. By all logic, the humans should have been destroyed within the first few minutes. Yet Kane's forces struck with such precision and ferocity that the Council was caught completely off guard. They bypassed the main defenses and targeted the critical systems, disabling the planetary shields and communications networks. The attack was over before the Council's fleet could even organize a defense. The most baffling part was that Kane didn't stay to claim victory. He left just as quickly as he had come, retreating back into the shadows, leaving behind a burning wreckage of Council ships. By the time reinforcements arrived, the human fleet had vanished without a trace. The Council was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered pride. The audacity of it all. How could such a small group of humans cause such havoc? Valak didn't understand. The Council had every advantage. Superior numbers, advanced technology, and a vast fleet of ships. And yet these humans, led by Alex Kane, were proving to be a real threat. Something had to be done to stop them. Valak ordered a response. He would not allow his reputation to be tarnished by a few primitive humans. The Council's command center, located in the heart of the Empire, issued a directive to every sector: capture or kill Alex Kane. No more playing around. If this human was allowed to continue, the Council's reign would be in jeopardy. The hunt for Kane became Valak's singular focus. He coordinated with intelligence officers, mapped out potential hideouts, and anticipated the human leader's next move. But Kane was elusive. Every time Valak thought he had cornered him, the human slipped away, vanishing into the depths of space. Then came the intelligence that Valak had been waiting for, a report stating that Alex Kane had been spotted on the mining planet of Damaris, located on the outer rim of Council space. This planet, though considered low priority by the Council, was a vital resource for the human rebellion. It was here that Kane had made his headquarters, hiding in plain sight among the colony workers. Valak decided that this was the moment. He gathered his forces, knowing that this mission would either make or break his career. He could not allow Kane to continue to haunt him, to undermine the very foundation of the Council's power. He would capture Kane, make an example of him, and send a message to the humans that their resistance was futile. The plan was simple: strike quickly, capture Kane, and leave no trace. But as Valak and his fleet approached Damaris, something felt off. There were no defenses, no sign of the human resistance that had been reported. The planet appeared quiet, peaceful even. Valak's instincts screamed that something was wrong, but he dismissed it. He was too close to victory to turn back now. As his fleet descended into the atmosphere, Valak's eyes narrowed. The calm was unsettling. Where were the humans? Where was Kane? The first explosion shattered the silence. Suddenly, all hell broke loose. The skies erupted with fire as hidden human ships emerged from the shadows, launching missiles and energy blasts that rocked the Council fleet. Valak's flagship shuddered under the impact, but he remained resolute. He ordered his fleet to return fire, to push back against the unexpected attack. But it wasn't enough. The human ships were everywhere, attacking from multiple angles, throwing Valak's forces into disarray. Valak realized too late that he had walked into a trap. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a calculated strike designed to lure the Council forces into a vulnerable position. As his fleet scrambled to defend themselves, Valak saw a small figure emerge from the chaos. It was Alex Kane, leading the charge from the front. The human was unarmed, only a communicator in his hand, but his presence commanded attention. He moved like a shadow, slipping between explosions, rallying his troops with words that filled the air with a strange energy. Valak's blood boiled with anger. How dare this human challenge him again? How dare he make a mockery of the Council's might? He would not let this go unpunished. He would capture Kane, destroy his fleet, and finally bring an end to this madness. But the humans had another trick up their sleeve. Just as Valak's forces began to regain control, a second wave of human fighters appeared, this time targeting the Council's communications network. With a single strike, the human fleet disabled all incoming communications, rendering Valak's ships blind. They were cut off from each other, vulnerable to further attack. Valak gritted his teeth. It was happening again. The humans were outsmarting him, exploiting every weakness. Alex Kane was proving to be an unstoppable force, one that the Council could not comprehend. Hours passed, and the battle raged on, but it was clear to Valak that the humans were gaining the upper hand. By the time the Council reinforcements arrived, the humans had already retreated, leaving nothing but the smoldering remains of Council ships behind. Once again, Valak had been bested by Alex Kane. The humans' defiance burned brighter than ever, and Valak could feel the weight of his own failure. He had underestimated humanity once again. And this time, he wasn't sure if the Council could ever recover. The stories of Alex Kane's deeds spread like wildfire across the galaxy. No longer just a small rebellion, humanity had become a force to be reckoned with. Valak knew that he could no longer see the humans as an annoyance. They were a real threat, and their leader, Alex Kane, was a warrior whose challenge haunted the very heart of the Galactic Council. The following weeks after the battle at Damaris left Valak in a deep state of contemplation. The haunting image of Alex Kane's unyielding spirit burned into his mind, refusing to be erased. The battle had been a disaster for the Council, a failure of monumental proportions, and Valak was beginning to understand that humanity was no longer a mere irritant. They were a force unlike any the Council had encountered before. Valak was a skilled strategist. He had crushed empires, wiped out entire civilizations with precision, and instilled fear throughout the galaxy. But humanity was proving to be something far different from the species he had conquered. They didn't fight with conventional tactics or standard strategies. They fought with a ferocity that came from their core, a fight for survival, for freedom, for something larger than themselves. And at the heart of this resistance was Kane, a human whose name alone caused ripples throughout the Council. It was clear to Valak that the Council needed a new approach. They could no longer underestimate humanity or rely on their usual methods of warfare. The humans were resourceful, intelligent, and most terrifying of all, they had a leader who could rally them to do the impossible. Valak knew that in order to defeat them, he would need to understand them better. And to do that, he would have to outsmart Kane, something that had eluded him thus far. As Valak sat in the war room aboard his flagship, studying the reports of human movements, he began to form a plan. The humans had shown an ability to adapt quickly, learning from every defeat, evolving their tactics. But Valak had one advantage. He knew Kane's nature. He understood that the human leader was driven by more than just strategy. Kane was motivated by something deeper, something that Valak could use to his advantage. Valak gathered his most trusted officers, each of them experts in their own right, and began to lay out his new plan. He would not engage Kane directly on the battlefield. Instead, he would strike at the heart of the human rebellion, their morale. Kane was not just a warrior. He was a symbol, a beacon for the humans. If they could undermine that symbol, shake the belief that Kane was invincible, they could break the will of humanity to fight. The plan was dangerous, but it was the only option left. Valak would launch a covert strike on one of humanity's key supply routes. If the humans lost their resources, it would force them into retreat. Without their supplies, they would have no choice but to scatter, unable to continue the war. However, there was a problem. To do this, Valak would need to get close to Kane, understand his weaknesses, and exploit them. But how? Kane was elusive, always one step ahead. The human leader had the uncanny ability to appear when and where the Council least expected it. If Valak was going to stop him, he would have to think like Kane. He would need to anticipate his next move before the human even made it. After much deliberation, Valak decided on a bold move. He would take a more personal approach. Instead of trying to capture Kane through conventional means, Valak would lure him into a trap. But this trap would not be one of force or firepower. It would be psychological. He would plant seeds of doubt, undermine the very foundation of Kane's rebellion. The human leader had a single unshakable belief, that the fight was worth it. He believed that humanity's survival, its future, depended on standing up to the Council. Valak realized that if he could shatter this belief, if he could convince the humans that their cause was futile, that they were only prolonging their inevitable destruction, then he could turn the tide of the war. The first part of Valak's plan was to exploit the human weakness for leadership. Kane was the glue that held the human resistance together. Without him, they would fall apart. Valak would use this to his advantage, staging a series of attacks against human supply ships, with the goal of forcing Kane into a direct confrontation. The objective was simple: draw Kane out, isolate him from his forces, and then break him psychologically. Valak's fleet moved quickly, launching a series of successful strikes on several key human supply lines. The attacks were swift and brutal, targeting vulnerable vessels. With each successful raid, the Council's forces grew bolder, their morale rising as they tasted victory after victory. The humans, on the other hand, began to falter. The resistance groups had to pull back, their resources running low, their supply chains in disarray. But what Valak didn't anticipate was Kane's response. The human leader, though cut off from his primary forces, refused to retreat. Instead, he took a more unconventional approach. He went rogue. He gathered a small group of elite human soldiers, and together they launched a series of guerrilla raids against the Council's rear guard. Kane's tactics were reckless, but they were effective. His forces struck with precision, sabotaging Council operations from within, all while staying under the radar. Valak had to admit, begrudgingly, that Kane's resilience was impressive. The human commander was more than just a leader. He was a symbol of defiance, of resilience, and of something that the Council couldn't comprehend: freedom. As the war dragged on, both sides began to suffer losses. The humans were weakening, but they weren't giving up. They fought on, every human warrior pushing forward with the same determination that Kane himself exhibited. And Valak, despite his growing frustration, realized that he was in a much tougher position than he had ever anticipated. One fateful day, Valak's fleet received a report that sent shockwaves through the Council. The humans, led by none other than Alex Kane, had launched a massive assault on a highly fortified Council research facility, one that housed advanced technology capable of turning the tide of the war. The facility was located deep in Council territory, and the attack was nothing short of audacious. It was clear that the humans were willing to risk everything for the chance to gain an advantage. Valak's heart raced as he read the report. This was it. The humans were desperate. Kane was desperate. This was the moment to strike. He gathered his forces for a counterattack, planning to trap Kane once and for all. He couldn't allow the humans to take control of such vital technology. If they succeeded, it would mean the end of the Council's reign. But as Valak's fleet moved into position, he realized that something was wrong. The attack had been a diversion. Kane wasn't after the facility at all. He had drawn the Council into a trap of his own, using their greed and their obsession with victory to lure them away from the true objective. Valak cursed under his breath. Once again, he had underestimated the human commander. Alex Kane wasn't just a warrior. He was a master tactician, and Valak had played right into his hands. The war had only just begun, and Valak was realizing more and more that humanity's resolve was far stronger than the Council had ever anticipated. Kane's stories, his courage, and his defiance had become the stuff of legend. And as long as Kane was alive, the Council's reign was never truly secure. Valak's thoughts churned as he paced in the dimly lit command room aboard his flagship. The events that had transpired in the last few weeks had left him with a bitter sense of uncertainty. The battle for control was becoming a far more complex and elusive game than he ever imagined. Humanity, under the command of Alex Kane, had outwitted him at every turn, and now the Council was on the defensive. The odds were starting to shift in humanity's favor, and for the first time in his long career, Valak wasn't sure how to regain control. The last mission had been disastrous, but it was also enlightening. The Council had poured its resources into capturing the human leader, Kane, but once again, they had been tricked into a trap. What should have been an easy victory had turned into an embarrassing defeat. Kane had managed to pull off a spectacular diversion, using the chaos to cripple one of the Council's major research facilities, forcing them to scramble and leave critical technologies unprotected. Valak couldn't afford another failure like that. The war in his mind was a ticking clock. Every second that passed made it harder to stay in control. But Kane wasn't just a problem in terms of tactics. He was a symbol of defiance, yes, but more importantly, a symbol of hope to the humans. To defeat him, to break the human will, would not only require victory on the battlefield, it would require the crushing of their belief system, their very reason to fight. Valak had studied Kane's movements and his ideology. It was clear that this was no ordinary human. Kane didn't just want to win. He wanted to see the Council crumble, to show that humanity could stand on equal footing with the Galactic Council. Valak had tried every military tactic in the book, but none of it had worked. The Council's overwhelming power and advanced technology had failed to stop the humans, and Valak now found himself questioning everything he had ever believed in. The human war machine, small and seemingly insignificant compared to the might of the Council, kept coming back, stronger than ever. The answers Valak needed to end this conflict lay not in more attacks, more force. No, the answer was simpler than that. It was psychological warfare. If he could strip away the mystique of Alex Kane, if he could destroy the image of Kane as the unbreakable leader, the symbol of humanity's fight, then the humans would lose their will to continue. Valak reached for his communicator, signaling his most trusted officers. "Prepare for Operation Eclipse," he ordered, his voice cold and resolute. "We are going to break Kane's spirit once and for all." The plan was set in motion swiftly. Valak had gathered a select group of elite operatives, highly skilled in infiltration and sabotage. Their mission was to strike at the heart of Kane's operations, his family. The human resistance had always been a tight-knit group, led by the ideals of their commander. The more Valak thought about it, the more certain he became that the humans could be swayed if they saw that their leader had something to lose. He wasn't just fighting for a cause. He was fighting for the ones he loved. Humanity's fierce resolve was rooted in Kane's personal attachment to his people. Valak had learned that Kane's family was living on a small, secluded planet in Council-controlled space. The planet, known as Vera, was considered a low-value world by the Council, largely untouched by the larger conflict. It was the perfect place to strike without drawing attention. Once they were there, Valak's operatives would infiltrate the small human settlement, capturing Kane's family and forcing the leader to make a choice: continue his fight or abandon his people for their safety. Valak believed this would break Kane. The idea of his family being used as pawns in a political game would tear apart the human leader's resolve. It was a gamble, but in Valak's mind, it was the only way to force Kane into submission. As Valak watched the preparations unfold, his heart was a mixture of cold determination and frustration. He was no stranger to cruelty. But this felt different. He was playing with emotions, trying to manipulate a man who had become more than just a target. Alex Kane had become something more, a person whose very name stirred both hatred and respect in the hearts of the Council. Valak had never met Kane face to face, but in many ways, the human had come to represent everything the Council stood against: independence, defiance, and the unshakable belief that even the most unlikely of civilizations could stand up to the might of the Galactic Empire. Valak's eyes narrowed as he focused on the mission ahead. He couldn't let sentiment cloud his judgment. Kane's human qualities, his love for his people, his strength as a leader, were all weaknesses that could be exploited. If he could break the man, the rebellion would collapse. He would shatter humanity's resolve once and for all. The war would be over. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, Alex Kane was preparing for what he knew would be one of the most challenging operations of the war. His scouts had reported that the Council was amassing forces near the virus system, and something didn't sit right with him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would change the course of the entire conflict. The Council was getting desperate, and desperation often led to recklessness. Kane's instincts had always served him well, and he knew that if they attacked Vera, the planet where his family was hiding, he would lose everything. He couldn't risk it. He had to make a choice: continue the fight for the greater good, or go back to Vera and protect his family. Every moment spent away from them felt like a betrayal. But he had to believe that his people, the ones he was leading, needed him now more than ever. But Kane was about to discover that the Council's plan had already been set in motion. Unbeknownst to him, Valak's operatives had already landed on Vera. They were moving swiftly, silently, infiltrating the civilian population, and with a quiet efficiency, they captured every family member of Kane's that they could find. They didn't just capture them. They systematically erased all traces of their existence, leaving behind no room for hope, no way for Kane to track them down. It was a ruthless, calculated move designed to break his spirit. As Kane prepared to leave for Vera, he received a communication from one of his trusted scouts. The news was worse than he could have imagined. Vera had been compromised. The Council had already struck. His family, his entire reason for fighting, was now in their hands. The weight of the moment settled on Kane's shoulders. For the first time in this war, he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something far more personal. And Valak, for all his cunning, had made a grave mistake. He had underestimated the one thing that would drive Alex Kane to the edge of destruction: the power of a man's love for his family. The human leader, now more determined than ever, would stop at nothing to get his people back. The war had just entered a new dangerous phase. Valak had given him a reason to fight, a reason that would make the outcome of this conflict uncertain once again. Valak stood before the war room's holographic map, his gaze fixed on the data that flickered before him. The operation was proceeding exactly as he had planned. The trap was set. Kane's family, once hidden on the distant planet of Vera, had been taken. The Council's operatives were now holding them in a secret facility deep within enemy lines. The human leader, Alex Kane, would have no choice but to fall into their hands. His only option was to submit, to give up the fight for the safety of his loved ones. The Council was certain of it. But Valak felt uneasy. The reports from his scouts indicated that Kane's movements were erratic. Instead of retreating as Valak expected, the human leader had gathered his forces and moved toward the Vera system with unparalleled speed. There was no hesitation in Kane's actions, no sign of fear. Instead, the reports suggested that the humans were more united than ever, with their morale at an all-time high despite their losses. Something didn't add up. It was almost as if Kane was driven by something more than the safety of his family. As Valak prepared his forces for the final assault, he couldn't help but wonder if he had underestimated his adversary once again. Kane was not just a leader. He was the heart of humanity's rebellion. He had become a symbol of hope, a beacon of defiance. But Valak's mind kept returning to one question. What was it that kept Kane fighting? Was it really just about family? Or was there something deeper that Valak had missed? Kane's heart raced as he stared out into the cold expanse of space, his ship cutting through the black void toward Vera. He knew what was waiting for him. His family, the people he loved more than anything else in this universe, were in the hands of the enemy. He could feel the weight of their capture like an anchor around his chest. The Council had forced his hand. He had no choice but to face them head-on. But Kane had a different perspective on what was at stake now. The Council had made a grave mistake, one they hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about his family. It was about every human who had ever dared to rise up against tyranny. It was about the survival of humanity's spirit, a spirit that the council had failed to understand. His people weren't just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for their freedom, for their right to exist. Cain had learned from the battles he had fought. He knew that fear, that the threat of losing everything could break even the strongest of warriors. But he had spent his entire life overcoming fear. And that fear, which Valak believed would shatter him, had transformed into something far more powerful. It had forged a rage, a fury that now burned inside him, ready to be unleashed. The council had underestimated this. He had to admit, though, that he had felt the sting of their capture. His mind wandered back to the moments before he had left. The last time he had seen his daughter, her tear-filled eyes begging him not to leave. The memory gnawed at his heart, but it also strengthened his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for the future of his people. He had given his word to them, and he would not back down. As his ship neared the virus system, Cain's mind raced with plans. He knew that Valak would expect him to approach with all the fury of a desperate man. But that's exactly what the council wanted. Valak wanted him to come charging in to make a mistake. Cain wasn't about to give him that satisfaction. He had learned to think like his enemies, to anticipate their every move, and now he would turn the tables. The council wanted to break him, to use his family against him. They had played their cards, but Cain had one final ace left to play. His people weren't just soldiers. They were his family too. And he would bring every last one of them into this fight if it meant stopping the council's reign once and for all. On the council flagship, Valak received an unexpected transmission. It was a message from Cain himself. Valak's eyes narrowed as he listened to the words that came through the comms system. "Valak," Cain's voice crackled over the speaker, calm but deadly. "You thought you could break me by taking my family. But you're wrong. I'm not just a man. I'm a leader of millions. You may have my family, but you'll never take our will to fight." Valak's jaw tightened. The human leader had the audacity to speak to him directly, to challenge him in such a way. For a moment, the sheer confidence in Cain's voice left Valak speechless. He had underestimated him. Again. Cain continued, his words carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. "I'm coming for them, and when I do, you'll see the true strength of humanity. I don't fight for my family. I fight for every last human being who believes we deserve our place in this galaxy. You'll learn that, Valak, the hard way."